Question is the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Chifley.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. You know the Coalition's in trouble when on a resolution that discusses how it's going to impact, how the federal budget will impact on their local communities. They have to talk about live exports and carbon tax. They know better than most that particularly those that have represented council and now in this chamber, they know the world of grief that they're going to hit when those councils are squeezed and squeezed hard by this decision, this unprovoked, not warned decision of the Abbott government. And in modern financial terms, $900 million rolls off the tongue too quickly. But when you talk to councils around the nation and you say to them that you're going to rip $925 million from them, you find out in real terms what this means. Because many local government bodies are already operating under heavy pressure. There's little or no fat in their operation, so you can imagine their surprise when they had discovered, in council chambers across the country when they were briefed, that they'd have their funds cut by the Abbott government, a cut inflicted when the Abbott government cruelly decided to freeze indexation on financial assistance grants. And what's disappointing, yet not surprising, is the way that the Abbott government steamrolls its way through these decisions. I mean, you only have to ask the AMA were they consulted about the GP tax. Of course they weren't. Ask pensioners whether or not they were consulted about brutal impacts of the budget. Of course not. In fact, they were told that by the Prime Minister there'd be no changes to pensions. Ask motorists if they were given any warning that fuel tax indexation would return. None. And what's ironic is the Abbott government's halted indexation for the funding of councils, but it's reintroduced indexation to help itself to the pockets and purses of Australian motorists. And under the guise of trying to respond to a self-manufactured budget emergency, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, I can't actually remember him anymore because you never see him these days, they've both been court-breaking promises, triggering protest across the country. And one of the most far-reaching yet not heavily advertised impacts of these broken promises was to freeze these grant indexations. The grants aren't there for giggles. They're there for a reason. Ratepayers look to their local council for the basics: libraries, parks, waste management, recreation facilities, roads, the vital bones of every thriving community. And the councils can't always attend to these responsibilities on their own. They need the backing of state and federal government, which is why the financial assistance grants are provided. Yep. They are provided from a federal level to help councils undertake those things that they couldn't undertake on their own. And what the Abbott government's told councils after the fact, after they've done their sums and their budgets, is that they can no longer expect help in the form of that indexation, which is disgraceful, and from a government that said it will be a no-surprises government. We've already seen the howling of state governments resulting from an $80 billion cut to hospitals and schools, and the New South Wales Premier Mike Baird described it as a kick in the guts. And now local government's objecting, and that's obviously because councils weren't consulted at all about the indexation freeze, and they'd already put together their budgets for 2014-15 and then had this landed on their laps. And the fallout for councils is they have little choice other than to either increase rates, they'll cut services, increase borrowings, or do a combination of the three, which is a horrifying prospect. And it is a classic example of the Abbott government's twisted priorities that, as the member for Franklin pointed out, they can introduce a paid parental leave scheme that will see $50,000 handed out to the well-off, but people in remote parts of the country that depend on their council to provide services will be affected. Now, my local council in Blacktown, one of the biggest in New South Wales, they estimate they'll lose $4.7 million over 3 years. And this is a council that's already shut pools, looking to privatise childcare, looking to also cut back on its infrastructure spend, and importantly has just announced an increase to council rates. In fact, last week they ratified a 5.3% council rate increase, and the Liberal Independent Council in Blacktown was so torn by this that the Independent, that's part of that coalition, voted against the rate increases. Imagine what it's going to be like when this $4.7 million hits this council on top of what they're already doing. I genuinely am concerned about what impact that will have on people in our area who've already seen one lot of rate rises, are going to see more, and are potentially going to see an even harsher cutting of services at a time when they need it most. It is a disgraceful display of arrogance by this government to cut funds to councils that need this money to do the work required in local communities across the country.